Today, we're looking at a tragic fire in Goa to understand what happens when the systems designed to protect us, well, when they just fail. This isn't just a story about a single fire. No, it's about a whole chain of decisions that led to a truly devastating night.
So let's start with the people who were there, the human cost of all this. In the middle of the chaos and the smoke, you have eyewitnesses like Ria, a tourist from Delhi. She described just a terrifying scene, a desperate scramble for safety that, for so many people, was simply impossible.
25. That's the number of lives lost. On a Sunday night in December, a packed nightclub literally became a death trap. We're talking about 25 people, tourists, staff members, who just went out for a normal evening and never came home. So how on earth did this happen? Let's break it down.
All right, so what exactly happened at this place, Birch by Romeo Lane? The fire broke out after midnight December 7th, 2025, in Arpora, North Goa. Now you gotta picture this. It's peak tourist season. The club was absolutely jam-packed. And the details, they're just heartbreaking. The victims included both tourists and a large number of the club's own staff. But here's a really critical point. Most of them died from suffocation, not from the flames. They were trapped inside. And what's really interesting is that while the initial police reports suggested something like a cylinder blast, eyewitnesses were all saying the same thing. It was fireworks, set off right there during a performance, something totally preventable.
So the fire itself, that was just the spark. The real tragedy here was magnified by this whole trail of ignored warnings, a series of just glaring safety failures right there on the ground. And we're not talking about hidden flaws. These were dangers that were obvious to pretty much anyone who looked. This just wasn't some random accident, you know? It was a disaster waiting to happen. I mean, look at this. First, the construction itself was incredibly flammable. They used things like palm and coconut leaves. Second, the exits were a huge problem. Small doors, a narrow way in and out, it just created a stampede. Third, the location was basically inaccessible. The lanes were so narrow that fire trucks had to park 400 meters away, which you can imagine caused a huge delay. And then, the real kicker, no fire clearance. A fire department report confirmed the club never, ever got its mandatory No-Objection Certificate, or NOC. This right here is just the first, most immediate layer of failure. So, you're probably thinking, a place this dangerous has to get shut down, right? Well, that's what some citizens thought too. They complained. But instead of action, they just hit a bureaucratic brick wall, a loophole that basically allowed this ticking time bomb to keep operating. Okay, to really get what happened next, we need to talk about something called the CRZ, the Coastal Regulation Zone. Think of it as a protected area along the coast. It's a really critical environmental law, and any construction inside this zone is super strictly controlled by a special group called the Goa Coastal Zone Management Authority, or let's just call it the GCZMA. And this timeline, wow, it just perfectly illustrates the complete inaction. Citizens actually did their part. They filed complaints a full year before the fire. The GCZMA even went out, inspected the site, found this huge 550 square meter structure built literally in the water body, and they issued a notice to demolish it. Things are moving, right? Wrong. Just 2 months before the fire, they dropped the entire case. The big question is, why? Well, their official reason was basically a technicality. They said, hey, even though the building is in a water body, it's technically outside the line we drew on the map for the CRZ area. So, not our problem, it's outside our jurisdiction. You gotta be kidding me. So if this authority wasn't gonna act, who on earth gave this place the green light to even open its doors? And that brings us to the next layer of this whole mess, a paradox of paperwork. This is maybe the most baffling part of the entire story. Yeah, I mean, if the club was flagged as an illegal construction, how was it allowed to operate as a business in the first place? The answer is this bizarre paradox where you have different parts of the government basically working against each other. It created a situation where the club was, at the very same time, both illegal and officially state-sanctioned. It makes no sense. Just look at this comparison. It's nuts. On one side, you have all the stuff that was missing or ignored. The big ones, the fire department NOC, the construction license. There was even a demolition order from the local village council. But then, look at the other side. They were granted a trade license, an excise license to sell liquor, a nod from the Goa Pollution Control Board, even NOCs for water and electricity. This contradiction is the absolute core of why the system failed. So it's pretty clear this tragedy wasn't just some one-off slip-up.
When you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the data shows this is part of a much larger systemic problem in Goa. There's a real pattern of failure here. And this is where it gets really staggering. This chart shows CRZ violations in India over the last 5 years. Look at Goa, 974 violations. Now look at every other coastal state in the country, combined 904. The tiny state of Goa has more violations than the rest of the country put together. That one chart tells you just how widespread and deep this problem really is. And the story might go even deeper than that. The original landowner alleges that this property was quietly rezoned. It went from being an eco-sensitive salt pan to a settlement zone, all without his knowledge. Now, if that's true, it suggests the system isn't just failing to enforce the rules. It might be actively changing the rules to help development, no matter the cost to safety or the environment. And believe it or not, none of this is new information. A major study back in 2015 pointed out these exact problems all across India. It found that these coastal authorities spend almost all their time, like up to 90%, just approving new projects. Conservation, less than 2% of their time. And monitoring things after they're approved? The study called that the greatest binding constraint, which is a fancy way of saying even when there are rules, absolutely no one is checking to see if people are following them. So when you look at it all, the Goa fire wasn't really caused by fireworks. It was fueled by a whole system in flames. Flammable construction, bureaucratic loopholes, contradictory permits, a pattern of failure. It really leaves us with one big question, doesn't it? When a tragedy like this happens, is it really about a failure of rules, or is it a failure of the systems that are supposed to enforce them? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.